Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen of the internet. Reels on the Rocks with whiskey and sweet tea for another unpretentious perspective on filmmaking. This week we'll be looking at Hollywood flopbuster The Thing, John Carpenter's 1982 meant-to-be blockbuster that went bust at the box office.
Please be advised, spoilers are ahead.
Alright, so this week I decided we would talk about John Carpenter's The Thing. The theme for this month was blockbusters, and what I really wanted to talk about was Jaws. But everyone talks about Jaws.
Yeah,
Jaws is boring.
Jaws has been done to death.
Well, it's not boring. It's probably my favorite Spielberg. I mean, that's why I wanted to talk about it. But it's a whole other thing.
Movie that when you hear how young he was, you're just like, what am I doing with my life?
It's a whole other thing. But so as I was trying to pick what film I wanted to talk about, I noticed on social media everyone was mourning the recent death of brilliant film composer Ennio Morricone. Or Morricone. You guys know me. We're several episodes in. You know I don't know how to pronounce anything, even if it's a very famous and awesome composer who should have won more Oscars. But I forgot that he had done the music for The Thing, because famously John Carpenter does all of his own music.
So he's a composer as well.
He famously calls his scores wallpaper for his movies because he's very minimalist. Probably the only score as a fan of his movies that I can think of is the Halloween theme song because it's so catchy.
Right.
But most of the time he just wants to set a mood. Nowadays, it's not that crazy to think that way because you look at movies by like Chris Nolan where it's just this big bombastic score.
Yeah.
But the thing that's interesting, so his composition sounded like a composition by John Carpenter. It's very minimalistic, a lot of synth. So a lot of people forget he did the music for it. And that got me thinking I should talk about this movie, not only because of Ennio Morricone, but because it's sort of an interesting twist on the blockbuster, because this movie was a huge, big budget thing, from Universal Pictures. John Carpenter had been coming up just a few years before he did Halloween 1 and 2, which were huge hits with no money. So it was like, oh, hey, let's give this guy a budget and see what happens. And things did not go well. Not only did this film bomb spectacularly, but the critics hated it. Roger Ebert famously said in his review of the movie that John Carpenter, he's better for directing a public flogging than a film. And there are worse ones. It's if you guys want to go into an internet rabbit hole, just Google critical reviews of this movie at the time because they are downright insulting. And it is funny because this movie is lauded as a classic nowadays for special effects.
Just based on that, I can just now imagine John Carpenter as that chick from Grease who sings There Are Worse Things I Could Do after reading that review. That poor guy. Oh my gosh.
John Carpenter was a Hollywood outsider, and he's always been one, and he never really liked the filmmaking business. He got famous sort of unintentionally with Halloween, and all this stuff, I'm sure was a blow to him, but like that's the whole thing. Like he was always kind of critical of the system. I think what probably hurt his feelings the most, if anything, he was actually a really big fan of the 1950s version of this movie, The Thing from Another World, and the director of that movie called the new one disgusting. He said it was a terrible rendition on it, which is funny because it's actually more faithful to the short story than his film was, which in the original version of The Thing, which was called The Thing from Another World, it was like a giant plant monster, so it had like very little to do with the whole story, so I don't know where he gets that. But yeah, John Carpenter's a huge fan of the original. And actually, there's a little Easter egg if you watch the first Halloween. The movie that the babysitter and the kids are watching on TV is The Thing from Another World. So I think if any critical review probably hurt his feelings, it was that one.
Never meet your heroes.
But especially coming out of what we talked about last time with Citizen Kane and whether it deserved Best Picture or not, it's like my opinion on whether a film is going to be a classic or not is not accolades, it's not money, it's time. Something that was a huge hit decades ago, no one will have heard of nowadays necessarily, maybe sometimes.
I completely agree with you, and the example I always use when people are like, that's not true, is Claude Monet. he spent his entire life trying to get into the quote-unquote salon, which I guess is where they display what people consider to be art. Never got into it. But guess what? He has probably some of the most famous paintings in the world, and people love his work. So just because people say this isn't cinema doesn't mean you're doing it wrong.
Exactly. And as I said with Citizen Kane, I think all Orson Welles really cared about is whether people liked his movie. And they did. It ended up doing pretty well. Not initially, though. We'll get into that at a different time. But it's interesting with The Thing because now film critics today say it's like a masterpiece. A lot of people, myself included, think it's John Carpenter's best movie. And it's just funny the way that works. You should never hold someone's movie review or how much money something made as evidence that it's a good movie. And that's something in film discourse that just irritates me. I hate it when people just say, well, so-and-so thinks it's good. So what? Use your own brain. What makes it good to you?
Right.
It's literally like writing a paper and quoting somebody and then not elaborating on the quote. It's like, oh, there's my proof. I win.
Yeah.
If someone hates The Thing, I'd just love to talk to them about it. I really don't care whether they love it or they hate it. If they have their own opinion about it, that is all I care about. And I guess that's a perfect segue into what did you think about it, seeing it for the first time?
So, to our listeners, I think this is my first John Carpenter movie. Possibly.
Most likely, when I'm thinking about his whole catalog. Unless you've seen Halloween, which I don't think you have.
I have not seen Halloween, although when I was a kid, I was very confused. I thought when people said the new Halloween movie is coming out, for some reason I had in my head Halloween Town. Totally different.
Also a good
audience.
Movie.
That is, I love that movie. Debbie Reynolds.
Great guilty pleasure.
Right?
But so what did you think of The Thing?
So I went into this I knew of The Thing. I'd never seen it. Like I told you, I knew of it mostly because I'm such a huge fan of the X-Files, and they had a whole episode that was basically an homage to it. So I kind of could see where it was going. However, I was not prepared for The Thing. Yeah. I really was not. I will just say I had to watch this over my lunch breaks, right?
Oh boy.
Bad choice. Okay, I guess we won't be having any chicken for I'll have this salad. Oh god, no, I guess we're not even having salad because that's green now too. There's something about special effects, the practical ones that were done back then with makeup. For some reason, like nowadays people will be like, oh, that looks bad, but I'm like, I don't know if that's the case. I just know it looks grosser back then. Everything back then looked grosser,
and that's why I like practical effects, because that is a real puppet essentially that they have there. So that is something for the actors to react to. Nowadays, and fun fact, there was a remake that maybe we'll talk about, and anyway, but like with practical effects, that is a thing for the actors to react to and to act around. When there's CGI, it's like, look into that empty space and pretend there's a monster there. So, obviously, if you're a good enough actor, you can make it work. But there's just something about practical effects. I don't hate CG or anything, but I do think
I think the CG would not have properly captured there was, like I said, there was something about, like, the Thing was not I'm just gonna start calling it when I say The Thing, I mean the movie. I mean the creature.
Who's on first?
I know, right? The creature in the film, I don't think the purpose of the way it was doing that, I don't think its purpose was to be as gross as it was. But the effects of the time really sold that, and that added a whole nother level of discomfort to what you were watching. I usually don't like gross out horror because I think that's easy. It's like, oh yeah, no one's gonna want to sit there and watch somebody, be gross. I can't even think.
For sure.
But in this case, it happened in small enough bursts to where that was not what the entire movie was. And
rewatching it myself, it is funny how, if you've seen the movie, all of the scenes very well because they probably scared the heck out of you. Like, I'll never forget the defibrillator scene. I think I probably had a mini heart attack, I must have been 14 or something. That scared the hell out of me.
Yeah, the defibrillator.
And the thing is, I do think that it was trying to be shocking when there was special effects, partly because
But it didn't rely on them.
It didn't, and that's the thing. And this is why I recommended it to you, and I recommend it to people. Like everyone who's been listening now knows I'm a big horror guy, but this is like a perfect example of it has a lot of horror tropes, but it relies on suspense.
Yes.
Another one of the best scenes in the movie is the blood test scene.
That one,
and that is not. It ends, with the monster coming out and it being scary and gross and whatever. But like the actual scene, you are tied to a chair, and the person next to you might be the thing, or the person conducting the test, and you don't know. And that's like the whole scariness is you don't know what's gonna happen. And normally we discuss spoilers, but just in the interest of anyone who hasn't seen the movie, I'm not going to say what happens in the blood test, because that is the other scene that scared the crap out of me.
But what I do want to say about that defibrillator scene is the way it's set up. Something's going to happen, but you're expecting it to go one way because of the way they've set up the creature this whole time. And then, okay, that's where we're going with that. Okay.
It's very creative. You wouldn't expect a mouth to be where a mouth shouldn't be, so to speak. And on the subject of special effects, we were talking about Steven Spielberg directing a film when he was 26. How old do you think Rob Bottin was when he made this? Or when he did the effects for this?
10. No, like a real answer. Just because you prefaced it with Steven Spielberg, I'm going to go kind of skew younger and be like, maybe like 21, 22.
Close. 23.
What? Okay.
So the person who did all the creature effects in this movie, his name's Rob Bottin. He's, obviously big now, but at the time he was only 23, and he actually was the assistant to Rick Baker, who would, I believe just the year prior, win the Academy Award for American Werewolf in London for the werewolf effects in that movie. And it's interesting, we talk about practical effects. This was kind of before the whole CGI craze, and we'll be talking a little bit more about special effects in our next review. But this was kind of like in an era where there were all these big names in creature effects. You had Rick Baker, Rob Bottin would get very... big. I noticed in the credits to the film there was a special thanks to Stan Winston, who was also a really big creature guy. And then later on, you'd have, I guess actually it was actually like a decade before, but you have Tom Savini, who's a really interesting guy, and he's an actor on top of doing special effects for a lot of zombie movies with Romero. So he did the special effects for Dawn of the Dead, and he would keep working with Romero, and eventually he ended up working with people like Quentin Tarantino, and and he would act in movies. And it's one of those things where even if you don't know who he is, I'm sure if I showed you a picture of his face, you'd be like, oh, I remember that guy in this B movie I saw, because he's not a good no offense, Tom Savini, he's not a great actor. I'll say that he's a good actor. He's not a great actor. But he's very good in cheesy stuff, and his effects are great. Very, very silly. And he actually, if anyone is interested in getting into effects, he's written a couple books. The big one is called Grand Illusions, and it's just all these little simple movie effects that are practical, so you don't even need to do any fancy tricks with your computer to do them. So he's, as well as being a big effects guy, he's into teaching people. But yeah, so as crazy as these effects were, they were done by a 23-year-old.
And I wouldn't even say, and even looking at them now, I wouldn't look at them and be like, oh, these didn't age well. No, they're in their own league. That's all I'm gonna say. There's nothing I did not feel like they were cheap or gimmicky, but I was just not prepared for the direction that it was going in. Although finally, I will be glad they finally made dogs be the victims for once, thank God.
Oh, speaking of, dude, that dog deserved an Oscar. That is out of tons of movies I've seen, that is still the best performance from an animal actor I've ever seen. And that's the thing, I've seen this film with people who've never seen it before, and 10 minutes into the movie, they're just and I know it's kind of obvious there's probably something wrong with the dog, with them being chased, the dog being chased after by the Norwegians at the beginning. But even so, you're there's something wrong with that, because it is amazing to me they were able to get it to because normally with animal training you get them to do tricks or like look a funny way at the camera, or but this dog, it's like amazing to me how they were able to get it to just act emotionless.
Yeah.
Didn't quietly walk around. It just had this blank expression. And it's hard to even explain unless you've seen the movie, but it is like the best performance from a dog in any movie I've ever seen, because it doesn't,
I can agree
like
with that.
in a lesser movie, like when it's like looking out the window at the guys, it have its mouth open with its tongue out or something. They somehow got this dog to just like look like a fake dog. It's crazy.
I was going to tell you, one of the things that I really liked about this movie was the way it portrayed the people in the situation. Because what I was going to say is this movie is a great example of what not to do when something bizarre is happening. But the way it's done, you can tell they're not being stupid. They're just basically the best way I can describe it is they were behaving the way that you actually would behave in the situation, not necessarily logically. Like sitting from my living room, I'm just like, okay, yeah, why would you do that? That's like the dumbest thing ever. But in the situation, it's like, no, yeah, that I can see why you would make that choice.
Here's a dig critics at the time had at the movie. I forget which, it might have even been Ebert, but one critic actually said that there are no characters in this movie. What's your reaction to that? That like all of them are just like one-dimensional or something?
Well, even if they are one-dimensional, they were still different in they were different enough in the way they were to where if you just based on how they behave, I would not say they were one-dimensional. And also, it's just a bunch of guys hanging out in the Arctic. Like, what dimension do you want?
And it's a simple premise. Like, first off, no. Because when you have, like, 10 guys or something, and you can kind of tell, one of them's a cop or an ex-cop, and he's very, like, stern and serious. You've got McCready, the pilot, who, because he's a pilot, he doesn't take anything seriously. He's the hero of the movie. He's... the first scene you see him in, I think, explains his character perfectly. He loses playing chess to a computer and destroys the computer.
Oh, that was funny.
How much better?
That.
Like, that is so not one-dimensional. And then you've got the scientist, and you've got the doctor. The doctor who, I'd say McCready's probably the most rounded, but like that's the thing, like. And the dog guy, the one who keeps all the dogs, is very distant for a large chunk of the movie. You think he's the thing, and it works because he's very emotionless, and it kind of goes with he's in charge of the dogs. Yeah. He loves the dogs, so he's not a people person. He's not very social.
Right.
So and that's the thing. Like I wouldn't say that all of these characters are like. Super fleshed out, but that's the thing. It's a simple premise. You get into the story and you get out of the story, and it's not like you need to hear everyone's like super big backstory or anything like that. But at least for the story that they're telling, I do think that you can tell the person's personality based on the actor's performance and everything. And it's weird to me. Again, it's crazy to read these reviews and just wonder what was going through their heads. And that's also a question a lot of people have is, why did this bomb? Because, that's just because critics hate something doesn't mean that people aren't going to see it. And I actually think this is the most likely reason. But one thing that happened was a week or 2 weeks before E.T. came out. Very different alien movie. Also one of the highest grossing movies of all time. Well, not of all time, but like it was the highest grossing movie of 1982. So that, I think, is the reason. I think a lot of people would say, oh, it's a horror movie, but incorrect. Because Poltergeist was one of the top 10 highest grossing movies of that year. Yeah. Also with some pretty nasty special effects. And... It beat out the thing. And funny enough, the director of Poltergeist was actually going to direct the thing at one point.
Really? Okay.
Yeah, so he dropped out for one reason or another. It's Tobe Hooper, the guy who did the Texas Chainsaw Massacre. Yes, the director of the Texas Chainsaw Massacre directed a Spielberg-produced horror movie for kids in the 80s. sip on that. But yeah, so he was going to direct. He dropped out probably to do Poltergeist, because Spielberg wanted him to do, hey, would you like to direct this movie for one of the biggest directors of the
Oh, you'd be like, yeah.
Well, I was going to do this thing for Universal, but it's Spielberg. What am I going to... So then Carpenter got brought on. Probably he fought his way in, because again, this was a remake of his favorite movie, one of his favorite movies, so it was sort of a passion project for him. But it's I think it's a mixture of things, but I do think E.T. certainly didn't help.
Yeah, so on one end we have the cute, lovable alien, and then we have the other one that bursts from your head and has so many tentacles and legs. And,
well, it doesn't even have a form as the thing. Like, it changes its... Like, even after the defibrillator scene, like, just the fact that every part of it can be its own organism. Like, it's like, oh, it's on fire, so then its head detaches and becomes another organism.
Yeah.
It's like, it's just this unspeakable, monstrous thing. It's the perfect name for the monster, because you don't have anything else to call it, really.
Now, I will say, it was fun. Well, once you got far enough into it, it was fun to look at the monster and be like, okay, what other creatures has it taken on? Like, I'm pretty sure at one point... Well, one point, I was like 90... Oh, when the dog first turns, I was like 98% sure. I'm like, oh, it must have absorbed a cockroach at one point. Well, because those legs look straight cockroachy.
Who knows if we'll talk about this in the future, but the prequel that they did, at least in that story, what it was like an organism that was collected by aliens, like collecting different species, and it broke out of its container. So then it's not even the alien driving the ship, at least in the prequel that they made, which I don't think the story is that bad. I think it's mostly a retread. The reason I don't like the prequel is because, and this is what's mind-boggling about this, and well, so they made it, and they did all CG effects for the thing in that movie. Mm-hmm. After doing all of the effects practically,
oh gosh, no.
The producers watched a cut of the movie and thought, this isn't going to gel with audiences, so we're just going to redo all of the effects in post, for this movie that is known for being, and the cool thing is, all the company that did all the effects released all of the footage on YouTube, so you can actually see what all these monsters originally looked like.
Right.
They look a lot better. So like, at least in that story, the thing wasn't even driving the spaceship, and that's actually something I also find pretty horrifying about the story, is when you find out that ship, you think that it's like, oh, it crashed yesterday or something, like in the movie,
right?
But it turns out, no, that opening cinematic of the ship crashing was 100 million years.
It was I thought it was 100,000.
No, it was like dinosaur times.
Wow.
So like,
oh my gosh, could you imagine?
Maybe it was 100,000.
Could you imagine if that thing got hold of the dinosaurs?
I think you were actually right. I think it was 100,000, but still, that was like late. That's like the Ice Age or something.
Yeah.
But yeah, that to me is what's scary, is like, that thing could have been around before we even had like civilized society. It's like, and that too, the scene where the doctor's doing the calculations on how long it would take for it.
Right.
And I actually whipped out my phone and calculated it, because it said 27,000 hours. That's basically 3.5 years.
Oh wow! I know. When I saw it too, I was like, I made a note. I was
to myself, like, that seems,
and I forgot. And
yeah,
I was like,
no, I
wanted to do that.
This is like the 20th time I've seen this movie, so I just whipped it out and did it right there and then.
I also love how self-explanatory that computer was.
You gotta love those old 80s effects. Like, at the time, it's like, oh wow, there's like a little animated amoeba there eating the other amoebas, right? And now it's like, oh wow, it looks like Pac-Man.
The computer just basically explained everything. It was like, I mean, didn't you have to build a program for this? And it was basically just like, probability that somebody on your team has been infected with said organism. And I was just
I love how his reaction, like, I understand stranding them there so no one can leave, but I'm gonna just start shooting everyone. It's like, well, what about the people who aren't? Wouldn't it be better to like try and figure out who it is or something? I understand.
Well, we saw what happened when that happened.
It's easy to sit back in your comfy chair at home and talk about how you'd handle the situation, but I probably would be like freaking out shooting people or like crying in a closet somewhere if that were me. So who knows? That's the thing about crazy things like that. You'll never be able to tell unless you're in that situation. But I guess so in conclusion, how would you recommend the movie to someone who is or isn't a horror fan?
I would recommend it. I would just warn them. I'll be like, you better make sure you don't have a heavy meal beforehand. If you are very squeamish, no.
Yeah, if you're just tuning in for the first time, we don't talk to each other about the movies. So
Yeah.
if I forget if you even said anything about it being on your lunch break. I wish maybe you did, and I had like some snarky comment about it or something. But yeah, if I had known that was your plan, I would have been like, "Don't do that. Get home."
Well, see, that would have been helpful. I actually think I did tell you. Well, I guess I'm gonna have to watch it over my lunch breaks because he has this thing. He's like, I have this thing where when it's a horror film or some violent film,
You want to be.
I want to be prepared for what's coming, so I will look up the parents guide like on IMDb, and he was like, "Don't do it for this," which I understand why. It would have totally
Now you see,
spoil
like-
it. But then I was like, when I tell you, oh, I'm gonna eat, so then I'm just gonna watch it over my lunch break, during the daylight and everything. I swear my blanket touched me during one of those scenes when the thing was crawling around. I freaked out. Bugs. I cannot deal with bugs. Even it wasn't even really bug. It was just.
It was a head with spider legs.
Yes, it was just like, oh my gosh, what is this thing do? Okay, the point is it is very, very well done. It is very suspenseful. It is a master class on, I would say, on, regardless of what that critic said, of characters reacting to a situation when they can't escape. I think that is amazing.
Absolutely.
It's a bottle movie.
Obviously, with me picking this, I recommend it, but I think it is a phenomenal special effects masterpiece. I think that the writing is very simple but effective, and I think that it is amazing that it was crucified the way it was, because that's the thing. Like I could see someone being critical about it being a little bit brutal or too scary or something, but especially again compared to Poltergeist, where if you haven't seen that movie, there's a man clawing his face off at one point.
That's attractive.
Oh yeah, I guess you haven't seen Poltergeist.
I have not seen Poltergeist.
We'll have to put that on the list at some point. But yeah, like you have some pretty graphically violent things in that movie, and I'm sure critics at the time said it was like a modern horror classic, which it was. But it's very puzzling to me to see just how
I will say
people were to this movie.
I just kind of realized something while we were talking. And so I've told you about, there are certain horror films I can't deal with for X, Y, or Z, or zombie movies for these particular reasons. One of the big things I always hate is I hate the fact that I will get to know and love a character for like 2 hours and then they just die not randomly. Obviously it's written in the thing. But so what I liked about this is, basically that's most of your emotional trauma. It comes from losing these characters that you love. What I like about this is it was literally the situation that was horrifying. I mean, like, obviously I was like, really? Did we have to do this a little bit? But for the most part, I really did appreciate the fact that they kept us at arm's length from really, and maybe this is what the guy was complaining about, from being emotionally invested in the characters so that we would just feel the horror of the situation.
And I think that I think you're right. And I think, and that's the thing too, especially after 28 Days Later, I was trying to think
You're trying to be nice to me.
I was trying to see, I really thought critically, like, is this something that is going to be hard for you to watch? And you've told me in the past that gore doesn't really bother you, so I knew the special effects, if they were
it grosses me out, but I can sit through it.
Yeah, and it's not true.
Yeah.
There's far worse out there, trust me.
There's one scene in that movie, and I'm trying to... it's so poignant, and I'm trying to understand. I still haven't figured out what exactly it was trying to say, but I feel like it was when they first have the first creature there that they bring back from, Norway world or whatever that is. The Norwegian camp.
Yes.
Norway world. They bring back the thing. So they're doing Blair is doing the autopsy on it, and he takes out the organ, and it looks, they take these organs out that are normal human organs, but the way they take them out looks as gross and disgusting as possible. But then he's like, oh, this is just all normal. I swear there was something supposed to be symbolic about the fact they made this look as gross as possible, and then they have him say it's normal.
After he says that, it actually cuts to the fused head of the thing. It looks like a human head fused to another human head. Like after he says, "Oh, everything in here is normal," like there's a cut to that. Yeah. I think it's supposed to be kind of like, what? Like, what do you mean? Okay. You know, like, I think that's what they were going for anyway.
I totally thought that was like a commentary on something.
But no, like, when I was thinking critically about it, everything that bothers you about zombie movies wasn't really in this movie. It does have a bit of a bummer ending, but not apocalyptic bummer. Like, quite frankly, they kind of saved the world. So even if it's a bit grim, it's not as bad as some other things. But I do think that's kind of what I mean about the simple premise is the monster can, mimic them. You don't know who the monster is, and that's it. And that's a thing too. Like, some movies get very self-indulgent and go on for 3 hours. And this movie is under 2 hours. It's in, it's out. And so, yes, some of the characters are written just well enough so that you can differentiate between them. But yeah, you don't get any backstory. So, like, when a character dies...
Like I said, I think, like I was saying, yeah, you're right. That way, your reaction is from what's happening, not from because you become attached to this character.
I think it also makes it harder for you to guess when it's a thing and when it's a person, because if you like thought that you knew the person really well, you'd probably be like, oh, they wouldn't do that.
Yeah.
Or that, like you'd start coming up with your own conspiracy theories. And trust me, there's especially with that ending, with the last two of them, there's so many arguments on the internet of who is a thing and who isn't a thing, and if they're both things, and if one is not a thing and the other is a thing. Like there's the bit where McCready hands the guy like the whiskey to drink, and there's like a bunch of people on the internet and off in the world that think that was actually full of gasoline, because he'd just been by a bunch of gasoline to blow up the thing or whatever, so he like filled up the whiskey bottle. So they all think like, oh, he drank the gasoline and didn't react, he's a thing. So it's a fun movie to go back, especially pretty much every time I rewatch it now, I try and figure out who was infected and who wasn't, and it's pretty cut and dry, but like there's always room to...
There's enough room there to where you can look into something more.
And there's also the bit where McCready is gone for a chunk of the movie, so you don't know if... But anywho, I'm glad you enjoyed it. I'm glad I didn't traumatize you.
I was not traumatized.
And I highly recommend everyone check this out. I'm sure you've heard about it by now since everyone talks about it, but it's a movie that I think has stood the test of time.
I'd agree. And if you are super squeamish but you want the basic premise, I would suggest watching season 1 episode of The X-Files.
It was
entitled
so good.
Ice. It is a very good homage. It's in the same spirit. It obviously will not have the same sort of master work that we see from John Carpenter in this film. However, if being super squeamish is something that'll bother you, but you still want to check that out.
For sure. And if you'd like to suggest a movie that'll gross T out even more, leave it in the comments. If you think I'm an idiot for liking this movie, leave that in the comments. Or just recommend something else for us to watch. Be sure to leave a like, subscribe if you want to, hit the bell icon. And yeah, hopefully we'll see you guys in the future.
And I would like to leave our listeners with one question. Speaking of the ending of that movie, which do you think would have been worse? Becoming part of the thing like 2 of the 3 survivors did at the end of the movie, or slowly freezing to death in the Arctic? So that's up for your debate. Which is worse?
Ooh, that's a good question. Well, we'll see you guys next time. Thank you for tuning in.
Thanks. Till the next time. Peace. Reels on the Rocks is a production of La Prince Laboratories. It is edited and produced by Alejandro Castillo, with original artwork by Ace Esparza. Follow us on Twitter at Reels on the Rocks, and tweet at us any movies or shows you'd like us to discuss in the future.